Yeah, and I also wanted to say something. I think to me, scriptures are my friends. I treat them like my friends. So if my friend came in and started telling me everything that I shouldn't do, I don't know how long that they would be my friend. Instead, somebody needs to tell me what to do, not what I shouldn't do. And I think this is a big, as you say, paradigm shift. We've always been told what not to do and that we're not good, we're sinners, etc. The sutras are saying to us, no, that's wrong thinking. We are not. We're actually divine beings who forgot that we're divine beings. So this was a whole way of me wanting to express to people, don't take things superficially. Take it into your heart and really understand and feel, who are we? And who is the person sitting next to us?
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the Savannah Podcast. I am jumping out of my skin with excitement to share with you this week's episode. I am passionate about the Yoga Sutras. I love them. And today we're talking to Nischala Joy Devi, who has written an incredible book called The Secret Power of Yoga with her own interpretation of the sutras. So we're just diving deep into the Yoga Sutras in this episode. We're going to discover heart-centered interpretations of the Yamas and the Niyamas. We're going to dissect with Nischala famous sutras that you may have heard of, like Sutra 1.2, and common Sanskrit words like Vritti and Samadhi. She's going to offer us a completely unique, heart-centered approach to translating the sutras and bringing the sutras into our daily life. So this episode is not to be missed. Of course, before we dive in, I would love it if you'd leave us a rating or review here on iTunes. It really makes a difference. Just take a quick moment to do that. And then introducing our guest today, Nischala Joy Devi is highly respected as an international advocate for her innovative way of expressing yoga and its subtle uses for spiritual growth and healing. Educated by masters in India and worldwide, she was a monastic disciple of Sri Swami Satchidanandaji for over 20 years. She's the author of several CDs and books, including The Healing Path of Yoga, The Secret Power of the Yoga Sutras, and today she's all ours. Let's dive in. Nischala, thank you so much for being with us today on the show. I'm such a fan of your book. And of course, the one I love is The Secret Power of Yoga, which is all about the Yoga Sutras. So we're going to get deep into that today. But tell us first, how did you come to yoga? And then how did you get so interested in the sutras specifically?
Interesting story. First of all, thank you for letting me be here and share this with all of the wonderful people out there. I can feel you even if I can't see you all. And I hope that this is very helpful to you and it will inspire you to really study the Yoga Sutras deeply. When I was first starting out, I actually was in Western medicine, and it was a very difficult career for me because it was focused mostly on the physical body. Well, actually, it's focused all on the physical body. And I knew that there was much more to healing than physical. So I decided to start taking some yoga classes just to make me not so tired and a little bit more compassionate to people. And from there, I realized that the asana portion, or the hatha yoga portion, which many people really are involved in when they call it yoga, so much that it's actually become synonymous with the word yoga, was really not particularly my interest because I was in the healing field and I knew the limitations of the physical body. I wanted to go beyond that. The Yoga Sutras, even though there were very few translations at the time, just sparked that flame in me to want to go deeper and deeper and really find out who I was in that way, I would know who everybody else is. And I wouldn't look at them as a sick body, but instead I would see the essence of divinity in each person.
That's beautiful. And I'd love it if you'd share with listeners. I think, probably 90% of them know, but for people who don't know, how do you explain or describe what the Yoga Sutras are to folks?
I think the interesting thing about the Yoga Sutras is people think that it's an advanced practice. Matter of fact, when I was first giving book talks, when my book first came out, and I was giving this talk at a pretty New Age type center, and this woman came up to me and she said to me, I think this is too advanced for me. I only started practicing yoga a year ago. I said, actually, this is what you learn about before you start practicing. So basically, the Yoga Sutras explains to us who we are in our essence, and from there gives us the practices to help us remember who we are and remind us of that divinity within us. So I think it's a very concise text that really gets right to the point. Actually, by the second sutra, it gets right to the point, telling us that we are divine no matter what happens, no matter what situation we're in. And then the rest of the book tells us how to get back to that when we've forgotten. So to me, it's a very eloquent book in that way. And it also is very pithy, whereas some of the other great spiritual books and have a lot of other things in it. There's a lot of stories in it that may be more difficult to pick out the essence because people sometimes get stuck on the stories and they can't relate to something that happened thousands of years ago. So the sutras are so precise in that and such an eloquent text that I loved it from the minute I first heard it.
No, it's a great point that so many of the other texts are very story-based, which is fun too, but it is so nice with the sutras. It's so direct. And can you tell us a little bit more about the history behind the book? Because I think most of us know about like Patanjali, but who was he really, right? And I have also heard that the sutras were designed to actually be sung before they were put down in writing. Is all of that true?
Well, we don't really know what's true. So what we do, I think, is, there's two ways of doing it. We can more or less gather from history what may or may not have happened. But, history is only as accurate as the people reporting it. So it's a very confusing thing. And especially in those times, we're talking about 2,500 years ago, most people couldn't write or read. So it was something that was delivered in a verbal way. So what we know about Patanjali, a little bit sketchy, to say the least. And one of the things that we do know is that the word or the name Patanjali actually was not a name. It was more of a title. It was something that was given to a great teacher. And the other thing that I think many people agree on, and again, to get a group of yogis and scholars to agree on something is never the easiest. But I think one of the things that is more or less agreed on is there were probably two Patanjalis that acted to get the sutras to the place that we know them today. And one was a scholar and the other was a practitioner. And the reason that this is thought is because it's a very different way of looking at something when you're a practitioner versus a scholar. So for instance, a Sanskrit scholar would take things much more literally. They look at the language and what the language is saying. And a practitioner would take that idea and sit and meditate on it until the truth was revealed to them. So the two of them work very well together. The grammatical aspect of Sanskrit and the practical aspect, which actually brought the truths to us as we find them today. The answer to your second part of your question about where they sung, the Sanskrit language is very, what we would consider from an English standpoint, very sing-songy. And most of the language and all the prayers are done that way. And it's done in a certain cadence. So yes, when it's repeated in Sanskrit, it sounds like it's being sung. And in fact, they are chanting it.
Tell me more about this relationship between the scholar and the practitioner, because this is the first I've ever heard of this, and I'm very, very interested. So the scholar would be more the person who is writing the sutras and sort of figuring out which order they, sort of like I'm kind of visualizing like a book editor type person, while the practitioner is focused more on the content of the spiritual side. Is that right?
Well, I think it might be actually the opposite way around, how I envision it anyway. So for instance, I'm sitting under a tree and meditating for a period of time. Someone, one of my students perhaps, comes over to me and says, what happens when you sit still? What happens? Is it the mind? Is it the heart? What happens with it? And in their desire to educate and talk to the student, they have to find words to express that which does not really have words. So they would then go to someone who was a scholar and say, this is my experience of it. How can we put this into words?
Got it. That's helpful. That makes sense.
How I envision it, because, for instance, even when I was going through, I was doing it, of course, the opposite way, but when I was going through trying to give a commentary for some of the sutras, what I would do, some of them were just beyond my mind, and I would literally have to sit and meditate on it, and then the meaning would come to me. So I really think that there was probably some type of spiritual teamwork, if I can use that expression, that allowed them to come to these conclusions and to use certain words in certain ways.
And that's really cool. It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying, when you were working on your translation, you were sort of like wearing both those hats in different moments within yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, probably more the practitioner than the scholar, because I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. And but I could feel what the word felt like rather than what it just meant. So, for instance, the other thing that happened, which was a little bit comical now, of course, it never is at the time, is I got a tremendous amount of criticism for doing this book, especially from scholars. And they would say to me, this isn't really what it means, this is what it means. And I would sort of chuckle to myself a little bit rather than getting ruffled. Better to chuckle than ruffle. I would sit, again, going into this deep space behind my mind, behind the cognitive mind, to figure out, what does this feel like? What does it experience? What was trying to be conveyed by that? And when I did that, then the answer came to me. And of course, then it comes through your mind because it has to have words and actions to fit it. But I think that that's really something that we miss in this day and age when we read. For instance, one of the aspects of the Yoga Sutras in the Niyamas is svadhyaya. And svadhyaya, people take literally to mean to study, but it also means to go introspective, to think about yourself and how do you relate to whatever that is. And I think that it seems to me, at least, that that's how it would have been done, because they didn't have the mental state that we have in today's world. It was very much more an intuitive, a way of feeling what all this meant. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things I actually do in my teacher training is I show people one translation of the sutras. I can't remember whose, but one of the very literal ones. And I usually use either the 8 limbs or the yamas or the niyamas. And then I offer up what you write in your book. And listeners, if you don't know, her book is The Secret Power of Yoga, A Woman's Guide to Heart and Spirit of the Yoga Sutras. So it's a much, I don't know how to say it, a more, could say more feminine, or just a different interpretation, basically. And it's so cool to see. I mean, I love your translation, but it's interesting for me to hear that you actually got criticized for that by the scholars who were like, this is the literal meaning of the word. Is that sort of what they were saying to you?
Oh, yes. And that you're surprised, I think, is wonderful. I expected it, and I got it. Some people actually got, believe it or not, angry that I wrote it. And because I was not a Sanskrit scholar. And how could someone like me, and especially a woman, it's never been done before. Why would a woman do something like that? Why would I care? So, one of the reasons that motivated me to do this, because it wasn't really something that I had dreamed of, writing a translation. But the students that I was teaching at the time were so inspired by getting teachings from the sutras that they could actually use in their everyday life. Because I think that's one of the things that we have to understand today. In order for spirituality to thrive, it has to be brought into our everyday world. It can't be something that's just done once a week or only in the mornings or whenever. It has to be, we have to bring that spirituality into the world right now. And that was really one of my motivations for writing it, as well as people encouraging me to put this down and have at least one translation out there that may be a little bit different and maybe appeal to people that aren't interested in learning Sanskrit or having it in a literal way like that.
If you love crystals as much as I do, check out savanaspirit.com. They have a range of gorgeous raw crystals, as well as rolled gemstones, pyramids, and crystal jewelry. The best part, you can use the discount code podcast30 for 30% off your first order today. And tell us more about this literal and interpretive spectrum, because I was under the impression, and I definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but that so many of these Sanskrit words could be translated many different ways. For example, like I studied Latin as a child, right? And all through high school. And even in that language, right? The one word, you choose as the translator several different ways that you would translate the word into English depending on the context and depending on the meaning. And there is some art to it as well. So is that the same with Sanskrit to a certain extent, or is it really more like these words just mean one thing?
I think you're absolutely right in that Sanskrit is actually a vibrational language. It is not a literal language, and that's why it gets back to what you said earlier about singing it or chanting it, because it's as much in the chanting as it is in the actual pronunciation of it. So, I think that we're so used to the English language, which is a very interesting language and a very precise language. I was just writing something right before the call, and I'm very careful at the words that I choose, and I always go to the thesaurus. That's one of my favorite tools. And to see how many different ways that you can say the same exact thing. And why would Sanskrit be any different than that? And what context is it used in? How is it used? All those things. And that's why I think it's so difficult when people say, literally, this is what Sanskrit means. Because I don't really feel that it means something literally as much as it does vibrationally, and how many different ways. For instance, one of the things that I did, which didn't seem that strange to me, but seemed very strange to other people, is when I encountered any word that was said in the negative in any translation, I took it and I changed it into the positive. For instance, just let me give you an example. Again, a niyama, a parigraha, a yama, a parigraha, which most people translate as non-greed. Does that uplift you? It doesn't uplift me to say that someone is not greedy. But if you change it around to the positive and you say it's an awareness of abundance, that then makes me feel very different. Ahimsa, people say it's non-harming. How about compassion and love for everyone? Isn't that also the meaning of it? So I don't think that I really changed the meaning as much as switched it to be positive. And I think that that's an awareness that many of us have come to when we start practicing yoga, that there's not only many ways to say things, but there's nice ways to say things, not nice ways to say things.
I love that you gave those examples, and let's get more from you too, so listeners can really know how special your book is. What you're sharing, I think, is not just so important because it's like turning a negative into a positive, but it's also making it more relatable, like what you said before, making it more approachable so that people can really integrate it into their daily life. Like I know yama, right, is often just translated as like abstinence, right? Which not only is that a little bit negative, it's like I don't really know what's that directing me to do in my day-to-day. And I think your translation, if I'm remembering correctly, for yama is reflection of our true nature, which is so much more beautiful, and just is like a reminder that yes, we all are, perfect just the way we are on the inside, and we just need to constantly remember and reawaken to that. And
it's interesting because historically, if you go back what happened, there was a big mistake that happened. I guess part of my writing, it was trying to remedy it. It was like putting a little bit of one flower on a big mountain, but it has to start somewhere. Hopefully the flower will pollinate. But what people have done, especially the first translators into English of the Sanskrit, of the sutras, and also the Bhagavad Gita, etc. And what they did is they were Christian. They were coming over from countries that were very much fundamentalist Christians, and they believed in the Bible, which is wonderful. And they saw then there was something that was 10. There were 5 yamas, 5 niyamas. And what they did is, instead of realizing it's a totally different culture and a totally different time, they said, oh, these are the 10 commandments of yoga. In actuality, they're very different. When the 10 commandments were delivered, they were delivered to stop people from doing what was perceived as things that were not good for them or good for their religious beliefs, etc. So they were very strong, and they were called commandments. The 10 commandments, thou shalt not. That's what they all start with. This was a very different time. This was written at a time when people felt that they have ascended from the divine, and they have come here to bring the human and the divinity together. And in bringing that together, these yamas and niyamas were reminding them of who they are. That's the big difference. So when we say yama is reflection of our true nature, that means if you have love and compassion for someone, that's your real true nature. Because you know that that person is you, and you know that they're not their body. They know that they're not their mind, as crazy as the mind can get. You know that they're a divine being. And that's what the yamas and niyamas are there to do, to elevate us to that next level.
I'm so glad you're sharing this, because it really is a complete paradigm shift from what I think even in many trainings today is taught to people, which is like, these are kind of like the do's and the don'ts or rules of yoga or something like that. And that's completely like our modern projection on, this text that's so old. And I love how your translation is focused on, it seems like always getting us back into our hearts as a key thing. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that maybe?
Yeah, and I also wanted to say something. I think to me, scriptures are my friends. I treat them like my friends. So if my friend came in and started telling me everything that I shouldn't do, I don't know how long that they would be my friend. Instead, somebody needs to tell me what to do, not what I shouldn't do. And I think this is a big, as you say, paradigm shift. We've always been told what not to do and that we're not good, we're sinners, etc. The sutras are saying to us, no, that's wrong thinking. We are not. We're actually divine beings who forgot that we're divine beings. So this was a whole way of me wanting to express to people, don't take things superficially. Take it into your heart and really understand and feel, who are we? And who is the person sitting next to us?
I couldn't agree more. And I think we have this tendency in our modern world to sort of crave and almost want those like do and don't instructions, because it's sort of easier than having to do the real deep work of, building self-compassion and self-love and then love for others. I think so many people are just like, oh, well, I'm a good yogi if I follow these rules set out, with the yamas and the niyamas, for example. And I'd love for you to talk about this one. Brahmacharya. People are literally like, oh, I have to be abstinent, or, like sex is bad. And if I'm following Yoga Sutras, I'm not supposed to, abstinence is an often used translation for that one, right? So what do you offer up instead or have to say about that one?
Oh boy, it's old stuff. It's old stuff. It's like going through your closet, where you've lived in a place for a long time. I think moving often is really a good idea, because we get our closets cleaned out. But say you've lived in a place for a long time and you start to look for something and you start to find all these old things and you look at them and you say, you know what? Physically, they don't fit me anymore, but who I am now, they really don't fit me anymore. And I think that's what happened with a lot of these misconstrued, if I can be that bold, concepts. We love to make things simple and fast without really understanding what this means. So if we look at this word, which is a beautiful word, Brahma, which means an aspect of the highest form of the divine, Acharya. What it means, so Acharya can mean teacher. It can mean also like a student, or one who follows, or one who adapts the practices of that highest aspect of the divine. Where it came to celibacy, I mean, I can trace it back and find out where. It's actually one of the 4 stages of what they call the ashramas of life. There's 4 of them. And the very first stage is the brahmacharya stage. And that's the stage of being a student, where you put all your energy into studying, learning the world, learning your studies. Generally at that time, because people were young, they didn't have relationships. And then the next phase that they went in, which was called the grihastha stage, is the stage where you formed relationships, bonds, you got married, had children, and then you just kept going on from there. So I think that's where they got it from, but that's really not what it means. Brahmacharya is really the ability to regulate, especially the senses and the mind, to be able to remember who we are. Again, it's all geared toward that. So if you regulate the sense of eating or taste, and you say, I'm going to eat moderately, that's considered brahmacharya. What people have done is they've taken it to the sexual aspect, which I'm not sure why they did that, because there's so many other things that we have to moderate in our life other than just sexuality. Certainly how much we eat, how much we work. I mean, most people I know work more than they have sex. And I'm not sure that choosing the sexual one to moderate is really the wisdom in that. Maybe they should moderate how much they work before they moderate the other. So, and also to say that we need to be celibate, the sexual bonding between 2 people is really a celebration of life and joy and spirituality. If done, how I put it, if done through karma yoga, which means I'm not there to worry about if I'm receiving pleasure. My job is to make sure that the other person receives pleasure. If they're good yogis, they will see to it that I've received the pleasure, and thereby making it a beautiful spiritual practice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know I don't know where that comes from either, but it's just proliferated because people ask about it all the time. Continuing with the controversy, I want to ask you about Sutra, and I'd love for you to pick some too, but I wanted to ask you about Sutra 1.2, because I think this is one that a lot of the listeners are familiar with. Most of us learn this if we do yoga teacher training or just dabble in the sutras, right? This Yoga Chitti Vritti Nirodha, which is so often translated as yoga is, the practice of quieting the mind stuff, right? Or of sort of silencing your thoughts or getting rid of your sort of monkey mind. And the translation you offer up is that yoga is the uniting of consciousness in the heart, which is so different and so beautiful. Tell us about this sutra.
I think one, and I always have to laugh when they call it mind stuff. They kind of made up words. There's no English word mind stuff. And they just made these things up when they translated it, because many people were trying so desperately to define consciousness. And it's such a difficult thing to do. And you have to realize that when these scholars were bringing this forward, they, again, going back to the time, they had this whole thing of control. If you look again at the time that the Yoga Sutras were translated, in Europe, it was a time of restraint of all your senses, especially your sexuality. It was considered only for procreation. And they used a lot of words like control. I'm not sure that the sutras really is about control as much as it is about transcendence. And I think there's a big difference between control and transcendence. So when we look at this beautiful, beautiful sutra, which, by the way, I'm thrilled they put it right at the beginning, because it lets us know right away what the goal of yoga is. And then the rest of the sutras explain it. So to me, first of all, the concept of mind is very new. It's only a couple of 100 years old. It was basically came up with the whole idea of psychology and the whole birth of that wonderful science. Really, when we look at ancients, everything came from the heart. Nothing came from the head. And the heart was the principle. If we look at all the scriptures, and I don't think there's an exception, even though I haven't read them all, but every place I go, it always talks about the heart, the heart, the heart. And when I was getting ready to really translate this, I couldn't find anything in the translation of the sutras. So what I did is I went back to the Upanishads, which is a book that a lot of the sutras were taken from. What I found is this constant remembrance of what is in the heart, and that's where our real consciousness lives. And I think that our gestures also, when someone is being sincere and talking to someone, they usually put their hand on their heart, not on their head. So we begin to get in, or hopefully out of, this whole concept that mind is what has to be controlled. What I usually ask people, and I'm going to ask all of you out there the same question, is how many of you are having a success controlling the mind? And usually not one hand goes up. However, if you go in through the heart and you put your awareness there, the mind more easily comes or settles down. And I've seen this over and over and over. So when we talk about spirituality, the mind is what comes between us, the spiritual being, and the outside world. And that's what changes it and gives us our conception of the world. When we can get through the mind and bring the heart in, everything looks different. For instance, there's a lot going on now, and I don't want to get into the whole politics because it's too painful for me. But there's certain groups of people that are being singled out, by the way, including women, that really don't have any reason to be singled out. So when I'm sitting next to someone, if it's the mind, I'm going to say, oh, she's a woman, she's this color, she's that color, she has this gender, etc., etc., etc. Whereas if it goes through the heart, I look next to that person, I smile, I touch them with my eyes, and I know that they are exactly the same as me. There's no difference when we're on the heart level. The mind level, the head level, many differences. So to me, that's where we need to go. And that's why I translated the sutra as this.
It's such a great example. And all this talk about the heart is making me think about another area where I think there's often maybe just some misconception in the yoga world, which is this idea of bhakti, right? Or devotional yoga. I know when I first learned that word and heard about it, decade ago, I was a little bit turned off, because I was like, well, I'm not about like worshiping something. And, even just that connotation of like worship with bhakti was sort of off-putting to me. Can you tell us a little bit about bhakti yoga and how it relates to the sutras and the work in your book?
Well, it's interesting because if you go through the sutras, one of the themes that is constant in the sutra more than anything else is Ishvara Pranidhana. It's mentioned more times than any other concept. And that is having that dedication, as I translate it, the dedication to the one light in everyone. How can't you worship that? I think when we get the concept of worship, we're going back out of the spirituality, we're going back into religion. And I think we have to be very careful to make sure that we understand that there is a difference between spirituality and religion.
Because I've seen Ishvara Pranidhana, as I'm sure you have, translated as God, right?
Yes, incorrect translation. So I think we have to be very careful because some of us have kept and embraced religion, and some of us have rejected religion, which is everybody's priority because of the institutionalization of it. I think most religions at their core are really spiritual, but the institution has taken it out of that realm. Too many rules, too many do's and don'ts, too many, if you do this, you're good, and if you don't do this, you're not good. And I think we have to bring it back to remembering that Ishvara Pranidhana is really acknowledging the light in each of us. And why it's not translated like that more, I can't tell you. But this to me is the essence of Ishvara Pranidhana, that when I meet you, I'm not looking at how much money you have, what color is your skin, what is your belief system, are you male, female, or other gender? What are you? It's why would I care when all I want to know is, are you the same as me? And my spirituality answers absolutely. We're one light that has been divided into billions. That's all it is. It's like a candle. You light I'm talking about a real candle now, not a battery operated that we've moved to, but a real candle. If you take a real candle and you have 1,000 people and each one of them lights their unlit candle from your candle still isn't diminished, the light. It's still as strong as it ever was. But now you're looking out on 1,000 other lights that are all the same. That's to me what Ishvara Pranidhana means.
Today I'm asking our listeners out there, do you meditate? Whether you're an avid meditator or just looking to get started, visit savanaspirit.com. They have everything you need to enhance your meditation practice. From mala beads to singing bowls to statues and incense, you can make your at-home meditation space truly sacred. Use the discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you. And this next question I feel like is almost a cruel question. But as we wrap up our time, I want to ask you, do you have a favorite, or maybe just a favorite in this period or this year of the sutras, or a translation or one of them that you'd really like to share with all of us that's relevant to you right now or special?
They're sort of like children.
I know, that's why it's cruel. It's like, how do you pick just one?
But let me just share one that actually I don't think actually needs translation, except for the first word, and that gets us into the third book. Actually, that was a cruel question.
We can do more than one if you want.
Well, let's just do this one because it's really, I think it's beautiful, and it's 3.35, and it's just what we were talking about. To me, it relates back to Sutra 1.2. And it says, by meditation on the heart, knowledge of the mind is obtained. So here we go again. Why are we so afraid to go in through the heart? That's where everything is known. That's where we know everything. And this is something that I really hold that. And then it says, after that, Sutra also talks about through samyam, or through meditation on the heart, awareness of divine consciousness dawns. So important. So important. To that person that you're sitting next to on the public transportation, in the restaurant, waiting in line, wherever it is, just glance at them and know that their heart and your heart beat as one. There's love there. And that's really something that with all the yoga practice that's going on in the world today, we just have to be kind to each other. That's all. It's so simple. Just kind and loving. It doesn't matter if you can touch your hands flat on your floor bending over. Can you be loving to the person next to you? And that to me is the essence and what I love about the sutras.
And I think, that really shines through in your translation and not so much the other translations, because I think many of the others, it seems like the goal of yoga is to attain samadhi, right? Which I think you're saying is, part of it. But again, it's access through that gateway of the heart.
And then what do you do after you attain samadhi? They have a wonderful expression in the Zen tradition. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Even if you attain samadhi, you still have to live in this world and be kind to each other. How much different would it be? Let's say tomorrow we declared International Day of Kindness, and everybody was kind to each other. The whole world would change. The whole world would change.
Will you define that word samadhi for us? Because I just realized maybe some listeners don't know it.
Yeah, it's merging with the divine consciousness. It's taking that everyday judgment and thoughts and feelings in the mind and saying, yes, they're there, but let me take my consciousness and merge it with the divine consciousness and really know who I am. And that's what happens in Samadhi. It's sort of like what they talked about in Star Trek as a mind meld. You know, you go to someone and let's say I meet you in the restaurant and we're going to have some tea together. And you sit down and I look at you and I say, how are you? And you say, oh, I'm fine. But I really, really look at you. And what I see when I look at you is not fine. I see that you're going through something. So instead of skirting around it or saying, okay, let's talk about something else, I go right to it. And because my heart feels what your heart's going through. And I said, it doesn't seem like you're fine right now. Do you want to talk about it? And all of a sudden, your tears come into your eyes because no one really looked at you with kindness and love. To me, it's a form of samadhi. You're melding with that person and you're feeling that love and compassion that is the real essence of who we are. Not the superficiality of, oh, so what have you been doing? What did you do? Where did you go? That's okay too. But when we really want to touch somebody, we have to touch them with our hearts. The minds won't do it. The minds will judge. For instance, if you say, oh, I just broke up with my boyfriend, then the mind starts, oh, well, he wasn't a very nice person anyway. This person is in pain. Address the pain, not the situation.
Well, I love how you just broaden the definition of samadhi so much. It's amazing because I know that in so many other translations, or my conception of it has been as I read other texts, is that, it's sort of like the goal of meditation. And it's when all the mind stuff is quieted, that's when you're in samadhi and, it's like, Kundalini has risen from the spine and all of a sudden there's this divine connection with, you're in Brahman or whatever. And you're just saying, no, samadhi can literally just be the union of you sitting with someone else, even just a close friend, and really being present for them fully in your heart center.
Absolutely. See, I think and if you look, I actually did write a chapter on the different samadhis. It's different samadhis. We're not just talking about nirvikalpa samadhi, the highest samadhi all the time. We're talking about what happens when a mother is nursing her baby in the middle of the night and she's sitting there with quiet all around her, except this soft sucking noise. And she looks up at the stars. Something happens. You can't deny that. You can't deny spirituality in our everyday life. Otherwise, it puts it back into somebody else's hands. We have to remember that things like that, anything that takes us out of ourself and our selfishness and merges us with a bigger consciousness is samadhi.
I love that. I love it. And as a final question, I think it's such a good note to really end on because I feel like I'm so inspired. I hope everyone listening is too. But we've talked so much about coming into the heart and, trying to really access that place. But of course, we live in a society and a time period where most of us are in our heads all day for a variety of reasons. So I'm wondering if you just want to share with listeners any practical tips or anything you do in your personal practice to just get into this heart space on a regular basis, whether it's a meditation or a yoga or just a daily little thing you're doing.
My most favorite that happens to be right in the middle between the Yamas and Niyamas, right in the middle of it. And let me get to it. It's Sutra 233, one of my favorites. Actually, 133 is also one of my favorites, but this one, and it's called in Sanskrit, because people like the Sanskrit, it's called Pratipaksha Bhavana.
I love that one too.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh, it's the best.
To me, it's the most practical and most amazing and most easy to use and gets you right into your heart. So let me just explain to people who don't know what that means. Bhavana is an attitude. It's a way of being. And pratipaksha means to change that, to cultivate the opposite way of being. So for instance, if I'm angry at somebody, which we all, especially when we move really fast, we get angry. Someone just pulled into my parking space and I'm angry because I'm late. I need that parking space and I was there first. Well, I can get angry. But as we all know, it takes a long time to get over an angry episode, physiologically even. I really don't want to do this. So what I do then is I make up a little story in my mind about why this person pulled into my parking space. Maybe they have an emergency, a doctor's appointment, or something happened, or they have to go get somebody that's sick. So I make up this reason. And when I do that, instead of my anger, what happens is my heart starts to understand how this person could have done something like this. A funny thing, actually, a true story actually happened to me. I was a little bit late. I was driving. There was 4 or 5 cars ahead of me. The light turned green and nobody moved. And I was getting very kind of annoyed, wanting the traffic to move. It was stayed there so long it actually turned red again. And by the next time it turned green, the traffic started and I, being very annoyed, started to go. And what I saw then was a woman walking across the street with her dog who was guiding her as a blind dog, as a guide dog. And that's why the traffic had stopped. And I thought to myself, look at that. I got myself all upset. And here was someone who was just trying to cross the street with this handicap. And everybody else was patiently waiting for this to happen. So instead of just using it for then, any time now that same situation comes to me, I think, oh, there must be a reason. Somebody is probably having difficulty getting across the big street. I'm going to have love and compassion in my heart. That's how we can use Pratibhakshabhava. Go to the good in people instead of the bad in people. Even if you have to look at the color of their tie and change your mind and say, oh, what a beautiful color tie. Instead, I don't like the way you said that. I don't like the way you did that. Who does it hurt? It hurts us much more than it hurts anybody else. So that's really one of the go-to things is Pratibhakshabhava, changing our attitude to be something that's elevating and uplifting. And to me, that's the practicality of the Yoga Sutras.
Thank you so, so much for sharing and for spending this time with us. Can you let listeners know the best way to find and stay connected with you? I could talk to you for like 5.5 hours, so I'm gonna reel myself in. The book is The Secret Power of Yoga, everyone who's listening, a woman's guide to the heart and spirit of the Yoga Sutras. You do not have to be a woman to read this book. You can definitely read it as a man or anyone. Anyone who has a heart qualifies to read the book. And then tell people what's coming up for you. Where's the best place that they can find and connect with you online?
Well, online, I have a Facebook page, Nischala Devi, and also a website, abundantwellbeing.com. And that will have my schedule on it. And I always say, wherever you are in the world, I'm probably appearing somewhere near you, because I've been traveling and I love to just share the teachings of yoga with people. So that's what I continue to do. But you can contact me through the website. There's some of our products on there, some of the books, CDs that I've done, etc. And there's also a lot of interviews that I have on there that you can just go and listen to them for free. Also, we have something that we offer people since the book has come out, which is the free weekly sutra. And this means you go to our website and you click on free weekly sutra, you put in your email address, and every week you'll get another sutra in your inbox with a little bit of commentary. Absolutely free, no strings attached, and you can learn the sutras that way.
Yes, I think I got on that mailing list years and years ago, and it's wonderful. So we'll put all of that info right below wherever you're listening. And of course, listeners, thank you so much for spending this time, for listening all the way to the very end. I would love to hear your feedback, thoughts, and comments on today's episode. Remember that your ratings and reviews here on iTunes mean the world to me, and they help get the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. So if you haven't taken a moment to give a quick rating or review on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, I would appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a beautiful day centered in your heart, and that you've maybe expanded your definition of some of these Sanskrit words and of the Yoga Sutras. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.